Hello, and welcome to the next video in our Intro to Creative Web Dev series. By now, you know how to write your own JavaScript and your own CSS and your own HTML. And this video introduces the idea of libraries, which let you use code that you don't have to write, that other people have written for you. And this is a really powerful tool because it opens up a whole world of coding tools to you. So I'm just going to dive right in. I think maybe I'll just start by talking about like why this is useful. So let me go to Replit and create a new project just to give myself a place to sort of work while I talk. Great. Cool. I guess they changed some stuff. Whatever. Okay, so I have my project, and I'm going to get rid of a couple things. I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to maybe just move my script tag up to the top just to put it up there, just to get it out of the way. And maybe I'll get rid of some of this stuff. Okay, so I've got my Hello World HTML project here, and it's got Hello World here. All right, so next what I want to do is maybe I'll start by, maybe I'll just give myself some p tags with some IDs. So like ID equals 1. This is kind of just for testing purposes. I don't really care about the content too much. I just want to get something up and working. So I want 1, 2, and finally 3. So I have 3 p tags, and what I want to do is maybe write some JavaScript, maybe in the onload event callback here to say like, I don't know, populate tags, something like that. And now I need to create a populate tags function populate tags. And now in here, what I want to do is say something like let one, or like maybe let's say like one element or element 1, doesn't really matter, element 1 equals document.get element get element by ID 1. And then I want to say like element 1 dot inner text equals hello. Doesn't really matter. I just want to get something up and running. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and does that work? No, it doesn't. Why doesn't that work? Because I spelled element 1 wrong, probably. And okay, now I have hello in element 1, and now I want to populate the next 2. And so I can do that by like copy pasting maybe, and element 2. And this is, I'm doing it this way because this is something that you have done. So like hello 2 maybe 2. But it's kind of annoying and it's kind of error prone. You've probably encountered errors in your own code this way, and it's just kind of, not very fun to code this way. So what I might do instead is bring some of this out into a function, like a useful function that I can call, and then call that function. So maybe instead of bothering with that, I'll say function set text, and it'll take 2 parameters like an ID and some text. And so now I can change my code to move that logic to this function, and it'll say let element equals document.get element by ID and element.inner text equals text. And this lets me shorten my code up quite a bit, because now I can say something like set text 1 hello 1, set text 2 hello 2, and then set text 3 hello 3. And the code itself doesn't really matter. I just want to get something up and running. So I've got hello 1, hello 2, and I spelled set text wrong, so that's not going to work. But now I do have hello 1, hello 2, hello 3. And this idea of like moving my code into like a reusable function is super handy, and that's really helpful. But it really only helps me in my own sort of coding environment. Now, what if I say, well, first of all, maybe I should mention like this code itself is only 2 lines long, but you can imagine that you want to do something that takes quite a few lines of code, but you need to do that multiple times. So I might pull that out into a function just like I've done here. But like I said, this kind of only helps me in my own environment right here. So what if I have a friend that um, needs this to work in their own project? Or let's say I'm like at my job and I'm working with someone who needs to use my code in their web page or in their code. Well, what I can do is pull that out into its own file. So I'm going to create a new file here, new file. Maybe I'll call it like tool.text, or like maybe text tool dot text dot js. I mean, I can name it whatever I want. It's just a file, just a JavaScript text file, and now I can move that function out into that file. So now I have texttool.js, and now in my index.html file, just like I loaded my script.js file, I can load my texttool.js file. So texttool.js. So now my HTML is loading the texttool.js file, and it's still loading my script.js file. So when the code gets here, it loads whatever's in texttool.js, which right now is just my setText function. And then when it gets here, it loads the script.js file, which is the code that actually uses that setText function. So I've just split my code up into 2 different files, and if I run this, it should still work. But what this means is that now I can send this file to my friend, and they can load the file exactly like I am doing in my HTML file, and then in their script.js file, they can call the setText function without having written it themselves. They don't have to worry about it. It's already there. Okay, so that's some background on how you might split out a piece of code into its own file. And long story short, you just created a JavaScript library. That is what a JavaScript library is it's a file that contains some JavaScript that someone else has written. And when you load that file into your code, that means that you can now like call the functions that that library or that file has defined. So from here, it's in big quotation marks, just a matter of figuring out what kinds of JavaScript libraries are out there and then how to use those libraries. So this is what this entire class has been building for. So I'm a little nervous that I'm not going to explain it very well, but we're going to find out together. What if, for example, I wanted to use a JavaScript library that, oh, I don't know, helped me do like creative coding things. So let's say I want to draw something with my JavaScript instead of being sort of confined to the world of HTML tags. Well, I might go to a search engine and type in something like creative coding JavaScript library. And ta-da! The first example, first set of examples is p5.js. So we started this class by using p5.js as like a standalone library or a standalone environment. But what it really is behind the scenes is a JavaScript library. And what that means is in my HTML file, I can load the JavaScript library, the p5 JavaScript library, and then in my JavaScript code, I can use that library. So let's kind of look at what that looks like. So I'm coming at P5 as if I've never seen it before, as if we don't know about the editor and stuff, but probably on here somewhere, maybe in the download section, will be a line of code that I'm looking for. I'm looking for like a script tag that has a source attribute, and I can copy that into my HTML. So it's probably somewhere over here, maybe. And okay, so here's a link to the file itself. So I can actually like just copy this URL and visit it in my browser. And you'll see that it's just a big old file of JavaScript. Some of the syntax might be a little new to you if you've not seen some of what they're doing, but it's really just JavaScript code. It's doing things like, here's an if statement, it's calling functions, it's setting variables, it's doing the things that you know how to do in your code, but it's many thousands of lines of code that all work together to let you draw stuff to the screen. And the sort of cool thing is you don't need to worry about how it works. It just works. But now that I have this URL, what I can do is go back to my index.html file. And let's say instead of loading texttool.js, I am going to load p5.js. So now I have a script tag which loads the p5.js library, and then I load script.js. I'm going to change some of this just because I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to maybe get rid of body, and I'm going to get rid of onload, and I'm just going to have like an empty thing here. Maybe I'll put back hello world. Okay, so I'm going to save this and I'm going to run it, and I think nothing will happen. So yep, nothing happened, and that's okay because I haven't yet actually used the p5 library. So I'm going to get rid of this file because I don't need it. So again, my HTML loads the p5 library and then loads the script.js file. And now my script.js file, let's say, starts out as empty, and now I need to use the p5 library. And how I do that kind of depends on exactly which library I am using, but you already know how to use p5. So you can go back to like week 1, week 2 to kind of remind yourself, or you can look through the reference to remind yourself. But I'm going to jump over to my script.js file, and I'm going to define a couple functions. First off, function setup. And then in here, I'm going to say create canvas, and I'm going to give it a size of, I don't know, maybe 200 by 200. And then in function draw, I'm going to say, I don't know, draw a circle at 100, 100, and I'll give it a size of 100. And the reason this works, the reason that I can call this create canvas function is the same reason that I could call the set text function when I had defined that in another file. The browser, your index.html file, does not care that this JS file is somewhere else. It doesn't know. It doesn't care. All it knows is that there's a bunch of JavaScript over there that has given me a bunch of functions, and now in script.js, I can call those functions. So let me save this and run it, and there we go. Now I have my circle, and from here, it's just p5. So maybe I can draw a background. Maybe I'll make it dark, so I'll run that. And now you are back in a coding environment that probably feels pretty familiar because it's where we started. We started in the p5 editor, which did some of this behind the scenes, did it for you. But at the end of the day, it is an HTML file that loads the p5 library and then loads another JavaScript file where you put your code. So behind the scenes, if I go to the p5 editor, if I click, where is it? This button right here, this little caret, this little expansion icon, if I click that, you'll see behind the scenes that p5 was HTML, JavaScript, and CSS the whole time. So I can click here to view my index.html file, and here it goes. It's loading the p5 library. It's actually loading another library that we haven't used, but it's there in case you need it. And then it loads some CSS, which is here. And then down here, it loads the sketch.js file. They called it sketch.js. You can call it whatever you want, script.js or yeah, anything you want, really. But p5 defaults to calling it sketch.js. But the idea is the same. It's just a JavaScript file. And these functions work because the HTML file has loaded the p5 library. And then there's style.css to set up some styling. But you can change all of this. So let's say I wanted to change the body element to have a background color of, I don't know, yellow. And this will work. And it works because it's behind the scenes HTML, CSS, JavaScript, which is exactly what you are learning over here, which is a different editor, but the same ideas. It's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So your index.html file, contains a script tag, which loads the JavaScript library. And then it contains another script tag, which loads your JavaScript, where you write your code. The library itself is code that other people have written, in this case, like the P5 developers or the open source developers who have contributed to P5. So that's this line. And then this line loads my script.js file where I put my code. So that's JavaScript libraries in a nutshell. And now you have come full circle to understanding like why we were working in P5 at the beginning. It's because everything you did in P5 applies to JavaScript, because that's what it is. It's a JavaScript library that let you do things like draw stuff to the screen. But when you were doing things like creating a variable, that was JavaScript the whole time. When you were doing things like creating an if statement, that was JavaScript the whole time. So I've hinted at the fact that P5 is JavaScript, and this is what I meant by that. Okay, so I don't know how that went. I'd be really curious to hear feedback on that, whether that was like a explosion of your brain moment, or if you're feeling like, what is he talking about? I would love to hear, both. So if you have questions, please let me know. So the next thing I want to talk about is, okay, so I've shown you how to load like your own sort of JavaScript library in its own file when I had the like tools.js file, and I've shown you how to load P5, which you know how to do because that's what we did in the very beginning of class. But like, what else is out there? So I kind of glossed over this when I just typed it into the editor or into my search engine of like creative coding JavaScript library. Chances are, if you are trying to do something in JavaScript, there is a library that does it for you. So I don't know, for example, if I type in like Google Maps JavaScript library, if you want to embed a Google map in your web page, there's a library for that. So you can go here and learn all about it. And read more exactly how you learned more in the P5 reference. You would read through this page. So like here is the like line of code you need to load. It looks like you need to do some extra stuff with some Google API key stuff, but you can read more about that if you want to. But let me work through maybe a simpler example. So let me remind myself of what I'm looking for. Let's say I have let me get rid of some of this. So I'm going to get rid of my script.js code. So now it just does nothing. And I'm going to go back to my index file and I'm going to get rid of my P5 code. Okay. And I'm going to go back to the idea of like just writing my own JavaScript for a second. So when I maybe have a button with an on click of show message, sure. And I'm going to say like click me. And I'm going to close out my tag. And I'm going to run this. It won't do anything yet, but I just want to make sure that my HTML is valid here. So I have click me. I could maybe put this in a p tag or just get rid of it, but it doesn't really matter. But I have a button, and now I need a show message function. So I'm going to go back to my script.js file and say function show message. And then in here, I'm going to say alert hello world. Doesn't really matter, just an example. Okay. So now if I run this, save it and run it, and I click here, I see hello world. But, this alert box is kind of ugly, and it's just kind of the default styling, which is terrible, and no one likes it. So what if I wanted to show an alert, but I wanted it to be prettier? Well, what I could do is type into a search engine something like JavaScript alert library. And let's see. So there's all kinds of options. So I might click through some of these and like read about the different options that I have. I might try a few different things. I'm going to go to this one because I think I know that this one works pretty well. So I'm going to go here, and what I'm looking for is a line like this, where it's like a script tag with a source attribute, which loads the JavaScript file. I can go to this file directly. I will say that if you see min in the name of the file, that means that they've gone through and applied a process to the code to make it look really ugly. The idea is that like the size of this file is now smaller because they've taken things out like white space and they've shortened all of the variable names. But in the end, it's still just JavaScript. You can usually get rid of the min part of a file name and it'll usually show you like a full file. Maybe not for this. I don't know. Let's see if I can get to it somehow. So, okay, I guess in this case, it only has the minified version. Usually you can get away with not typing min, but whatever, it doesn't matter because we really don't actually care too much about the source code. That's the whole value of JavaScript libraries is there's a bunch of code in here that works and we don't need to worry about why or how. But now that I have this, I can actually, I'm just going to copy this whole line and I'm going to put this back in my index.html file. I'm going to put it before my script.js tag. And okay, so now I'm loading the library. And now the next thing I need to do is figure out how the heck do I use the library. So what I'm doing next is looking for something like a reference page or an example page or something like that. And it actually looks like it's right here on their home page. So showing an alert, SWAL. So it looks like instead of calling alert, I will call this SWAL. I guess it stands for sweet alert. I don't actually know. So I'm going to go back to my code and I'm going to change my script.js file to, instead of calling alert, I'm going to call SWAL. I'm going to run that. And then I'm going to click here. And now you see that the dialog or the alert box here is, you know, it's a little bit more pretty or it's a little bit more professional or, you know, whatever word you want to use. But I didn't have to write any of this code. I didn't have to write code that makes this dialog like show this gray background or make this OK button look cool or, you know, any of the styling stuff. I just called this function and it worked. In the exact same way that when you called like the circle function in P5, you didn't have to worry about exactly how that was working behind the scenes. It just worked. So same idea here. Because I'm using a JavaScript library, I don't need to worry about it too much. So I can play around with some of these other examples. Looks like it might be interactive, so I can kind of you know, get something like this working. I can maybe copy this into my file here in the same way that you would have done it in P5. I'm just trying stuff out that I have found in this case, sweet alert reference and seeing what happens. So I'm going to save that and run it. And look at that. My beautiful dialogue works and I get that cool like check mark animation and it's just kind of cool and like professional and I don't know. It's much better than I could do especially in that amount of time. And I didn't have to write any of the code myself. That is the power of JavaScript libraries. Okay, I think that's about everything I wanted to talk about. So to sort of summarize, you can put your own JavaScript in multiple files, which can be handy for like organizing your code, or if you want to say like send some code to your friend or point them to your own code file. So I showed that example with like moving the set text or whatever I called it function into its own file. And then in index.html, I loaded that file and then loaded script.js and the code just kind of combines together and it works because the browser is loading both files. Then I introduced the idea of that file you load doesn't have to be yours. It can be any JavaScript library that you find out there on the wild internet. And as soon as you load the file for the JavaScript library that you have found, that gives you access to all of the variables and functions that library has defined or that file has defined. So I started by going through and showing you P5 because you have already seen that. So some of the functions and whatnot are already familiar to you, but P5 is itself a JavaScript library. It's a JavaScript library. So you can load it into your index.html page into your file, and then from there you can use the P5 features that it gives you. Then I talked more generally about how to find a JavaScript library just by typing like thing you want to do space JavaScript library into Google or whatever search engine you want to use, and you'll generally find something. And the idea is you'll like look through their webpage, look for something that's like script source equals blah blah blah, put that in your index.html file, and then look through the documentation for your library to understand like the kinds of functions you can call and the way you use it. And then copy that code, see if it works, and then change it from there. And that is the power of JavaScript libraries. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to talk about Bootstrap next, but I'm going to split that into its own video because it's kind of a lot, and I want to kind of separate them a little bit. But for now, that was JavaScript libraries, and now we have come full circle. Now you understand exactly how P5 was working behind the scenes, and you now know that behind the scenes, P5 has been HTML, CSS, and JavaScript the entire time. So my whole plan with this class was to sort of trick you into learning web development through the lens of P5, because everything you learned in P5 still applies. Okay, I'm going to stop rambling there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this framing because it's kind of new to this class and new to me, and I'd be really curious to hear like how that fit in your brain. But I'm going to shut up, and I'll see you in the next one where we learn about Bootstrap.